Nestled in the hills above Los Angeles, Jack Nicholson's former home on Mulholland Drive is as much a character as the legendary actor himself. Built in the 1960s, the sprawling property exudes old Hollywood charm, but beneath its glamorous facade lies a sinister history whispered about for decades. Locals talk about the house as if it were alive. Workers who renovated the property in the early 2000s reported eerie occurrences. Tools disappearing, lights flickering, and faint whispers echoing through the empty halls. But it wasn't until Claire Reynolds, a writer researching Hollywood hauntings, rented the house for a 6-month stay that its dark reputation truly came to light. From the first night, Claire felt uneasy. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. She chalked it up to an old house settling, but when she saw a shadowy figure glide past the glass doors of the patio, her pulse quickened. She stepped outside to investigate, finding nothing but the cool night breeze and a faint scent of cigar smoke lingering in the air. The unease deepened as days turned into weeks. Claire often heard footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway late at night, even though she was alone in the house. The sound always stopped just outside her bedroom door. One night, as she lay in bed, a soft knock echoed through the room. Heart racing, she forced herself to open the door, only to find the hallway empty. Claire became obsessed with the house's history. She discovered that before Nicholson bought the property, it belonged to a reclusive film producer, George Harland, whose mistress mysteriously vanished in the 1940s. Neighbors whispered that she was buried somewhere on the property, but no evidence ever surfaced. Nicholson himself reportedly had an unsettling experience while living there, once waking up to find all the doors and windows in the house wide open, though he was certain he had locked them before bed. One evening, Claire invited her friend Mark to stay the night, desperate for company. Mark, ever the skeptic, dismissed her fears as overactive imagination. But as they sat in the living room, a loud crash erupted from the upstairs. They rushed up to find the chandelier in the master bedroom shattered, its crystal shards glinting ominously in the moonlight. "I told you this place is haunted," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. Mark laughed nervously. There's got to be a logical explanation, but the laughter died in his throat when they heard it. The faint hum of a woman singing. The melody was melancholic, drifting from the walk-in closet at the end of the room. Claire and Mark exchanged terrified glances. "I'm not going in there," Claire whispered. Mark, emboldened by his skepticism, pushed the closet door open. Inside, the air was cold enough to see his breath, and the smell of cigar smoke was overpowering. On the floor lay a single red scarf, perfectly folded. "That wasn't here before," Mark muttered, his voice shaking. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, trapping Mark inside. Claire screamed and pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. From inside, Mark shouted, "Help me! She's here!" Then silence. When the door finally gave way, the closet was empty. Mark was gone. The scarf lay crumpled on the floor, as if discarded in haste. Claire fled the house that night, never to return. To this day, the property remains vacant, shrouded in mystery. Some say it's cursed. Others believe it's a portal to something dark. As for Claire, she still hears Mark's voice in her dreams, begging her to let him out. And if you ever find yourself driving along Mulholland Drive late at night, you might catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing at the gates of the old Nicholson estate, watching, waiting, for someone brave or foolish enough to step inside. Claire's escape from the house didn't mark the end of her torment. It was only the beginning. For weeks after fleeing, she wrestled with an unshakable guilt over leaving Mark behind. His disappearance was reported to the police, but searches of the property turned up nothing unusual. Officially, Mark was listed as a missing person, though Claire knew the truth was far darker. Unable to sleep, she spent her nights scouring old archives and forums dedicated to Hollywood lore, trying to uncover the secrets of the house. That's when she stumbled upon a name she hadn't seen before: Margaret Ellis, George Harland's mistress. Margaret had been an aspiring actress whose dreams of stardom were cut short after she moved into the house. A grainy photo Claire found showed Margaret standing on the patio, wearing a red scarf and holding a glass of champagne. The caption beneath the image read, "The lady in the red scarf." That scarf, Claire thought, chills running down her spine. The same one Mark had found in the closet. Determined to get answers, Claire reached out to a retired private investigator named Ben Morales, who had worked a case involving Harland years ago. Ben was reluctant to talk but finally agreed to meet her at a diner in the valley. Over coffee, he laid out a chilling tale. "The thing about that house," he said, leaning in close, "is it doesn't just trap people, it makes them part of its story." "What do you mean?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret didn't vanish. She changed. Witnesses swore they saw her after she disappeared, but not as herself. They'd catch her reflection in windows or hear her voice on old film reels. She wasn't alive, not in the way we understand. It's like the house absorbed her." Claire's stomach churned. "And Mark?" Ben shook his head. "If he's still in there, he's not Mark anymore." Despite Ben's warnings, Claire knew she had to return to the house, not just to find Mark, but to confront whatever force had claimed him. Armed with a flashlight, a tape recorder, and a growing sense of dread, she arrived at the property under the cover of darkness. The moment she stepped inside, the air felt heavier, like the house was aware of her presence. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a warning, but she pressed on, heading straight for the master bedroom where Mark had vanished. The closet door stood ajar, revealing the darkness within. Claire's hand shook as she reached for the tape recorder and pressed record. "I'm here," she said, her voice trembling. "If you can hear me, I need you to show me something. Mark, are you here?" For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the tape recorder hissed with static, followed by a faint voice. "Claire," her heart leapt into her throat. "Mark, is that you?" The static returned, but this time it was accompanied by another voice, softer, feminine, almost a whisper. "He's with us now." Claire stumbled backward, nearly dropping the recorder. The air grew colder, and the scent of cigars filled the room again. The closet door creaked as it slowly swung open. Inside, Claire saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure stood in the shadows, its face obscured but its outline unmistakably human. Around its neck hung the red scarf, fluttering as though caught in a phantom wind. "Mark," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The figure stepped forward, revealing eyes that shimmered like glass. Its lips moved, but the voice that came out wasn't Mark's. "You should have stayed away." Before Claire could react, the room began to warp. Walls stretched and twisted, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She screamed as unseen hands dragged her toward the closet, the doorway now yawning like a black hole. Just as she was pulled inside, her flashlight flickered, illuminating something carved into the back wall. A name, Margaret Ellis, and beneath it, freshly scratched into the wood, was another, Mark Lawson. The flashlight sputtered out, plunging Claire into darkness. All that remained was the sound of her screams, swallowed by the house. But what came next would haunt anyone who dared to investigate. Weeks later, neighbors reported seeing her silhouette in the windows, pacing the same hallway where she once heard the footsteps. And on quiet nights, a faint knock could be heard coming from inside the master bedroom, 3 soft taps, always followed by silence. The question lingered. Had Claire joined the house's growing collection of souls, or was she still fighting to escape? Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. A month after Claire vanished, the house sat silent, locked, and forgotten, its windows dark like the hollow eyes of a skull. Officially, the authorities had no explanation for her disappearance, though whispers among locals painted a chilling picture. People claimed to see a woman's face in the upstairs window at night, her expression frozen in terror. Others swore they heard laughter, low and guttural, coming from the direction of the house even when no one was there. But the house wasn't completely abandoned. A realtor, Ellen Carter, was tasked with selling the property, a nearly impossible job given its reputation. Determined to close the deal, Ellen scheduled a viewing with a potential buyer, a tech entrepreneur named Alex Warren, who had a penchant for collecting unusual properties. "This house has character," Alex said, stepping into the foyer, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "That's one way to put it," Ellen muttered under her breath, clutching her clipboard tightly. As they walked through the house, Ellen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to shift in her peripheral vision, and the temperature dropped noticeably when they entered the upstairs hallway. Alex, however, seemed unfazed, even intrigued. "Tell me about the history," Alex said, stopping in front of the master bedroom. Ellen hesitated. "It's had its fair share of owners. Jack Nicholson, for one. But there are rumors about disappearances. Nothing official, of course." Alex grinned. "Disappearances? You're underselling it. That's half the appeal. I like a house with stories." As Ellen reached for the bedroom door handle, her hand froze. For a moment, she could have sworn she felt a pulse beneath her fingers, as if the door were alive. She hesitated, but Alex pushed past her and swung the door open. The room was cold, unnaturally so, and the faint smell of cigars lingered in the air. Ellen tried to focus on her pitch, pointing out the original woodwork and the expansive views, but her voice wavered when she noticed something odd. The walk-in closet door was wide open. "That's strange," she said, mostly to herself. "I always make sure everything's shut before a showing." Alex walked toward the closet, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. He stood in the doorway, peering into the darkness. "What's back here?" "Just storage," Ellen replied quickly. "Nothing of interest." But Alex stepped inside. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the room seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, and the faint hum of a woman's voice began to drift through the space. Ellen's chest tightened. "Alex, maybe we should—" "I hear it," Alex said, his voice low, almost reverent. "She's singing." Ellen froze. "What are you talking about?" Alex turned to face her, his expression distant, as if he were in a trance. "She's waiting for me." Before Ellen could respond, the closet door slammed shut, the force of it rattling the walls. She rushed forward, banging on the door, yelling Alex's name, but there was no response. From inside, she thought she heard his voice, muffled and frantic, but it quickly faded into silence. Panic surged through her as she yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then, slowly, the door creaked open on its own. The closet was empty. Ellen stumbled back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her clipboard fell to the floor as she stared at the now dark room. She was about to run when she noticed something lying on the floor just inside the closet. A business card. She picked it up with trembling hands. It was Alex's card, but there was something strange about it. Scrawled across the back in jagged handwriting were two words: "Get out." Ellen didn't need to be told twice. She fled the house, leaving the front door wide open. But as she reached her car and fumbled with the keys, she glanced back one last time. In the master bedroom window, she saw Alex. He was standing there, motionless, his eyes glassy and his mouth twisted into an unnatural grin. He raised one hand in a slow, deliberate wave. Ellen sped away, her heart pounding. She told herself she would never return to the house, but something gnawed at her, a deep, unrelenting feeling that the story wasn't over. She couldn't stop thinking about the card, about the warning scrawled on it. How had Alex written it if he was already gone? And more importantly, who was it meant for? A week later, Ellen received a package at her office. There was no return address, only her name written in blocky letters. Inside was a single object, the red scarf. Ellen dropped it as if it burned her skin. But when she looked down, the scarf was gone. In its place was another business card. This one had no writing, only a faint, smeared handprint. The color? Red. Ellen tried to convince herself that it was all in her head. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even some sort of elaborate prank. She burned Alex's business card that night, watching the flames twist and devour the red-tinged handprint. But even as the card crumbled to ash, the scent of cigars filled the room, leaving her nauseated and trembling. The next morning, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. When she answered, a faint static greeted her, followed by a voice low, distorted, but unmistakably familiar. "Why did you leave me?" It was Alex. Ellen's breath caught. "Alex? Where are you?" A long silence followed. "And then she's here. She's waiting for you." The line went dead, leaving Ellen frozen in place. She tried calling the number back, but it didn't exist. Panic set in. Against every ounce of reason, she felt compelled to go back to the house. She needed answers about Alex, about the scarf, and about the whispers that had started invading her dreams. By the time she reached the house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the driveway. The gate stood ajar, though she was sure it had been locked after the last viewing. With each step toward the front door, her legs grew heavier, as if the house itself were trying to repel her. When she entered, the house was eerily silent. No hum of the air conditioner, no distant creaks of old wood, just an oppressive stillness. She gripped her flashlight tightly and made her way upstairs, stopping in front of the master bedroom. The door was open, revealing the walk-in closet at the far end of the room. The scarf was there, draped neatly over the closet's doorknob. It swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. "Alex!" Ellen called, her voice echoing. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from deep within the closet, came the unmistakable sound of breathing. Slow, labored, and uncomfortably close. Ellen's flashlight flickered as she stepped toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. When she reached the threshold, the breathing stopped. She shined her light into the closet, illuminating the far wall. Scratched into the wood, beneath the names Margaret Ellis and Mark Lawson, was a new name: Alex Warren. Ellen gasped, stumbling backward. The flashlight slipped from her hand and hit the floor, its beam bouncing wildly across the room. For a moment, the light caught something, a figure standing in the shadows. It was tall and still, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Ellen." The voice was soft, familiar, and dripping with malice. She froze as the figure stepped into the light. It was Alex, or at least it looked like him. His eyes were glassy, his skin pale, and his smile stretched too wide, as though someone had carved it into his face. "Why did you leave me?" he said again, his voice echoing unnaturally. Ellen backed away, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. She fell hard, her head hitting the floor. Dazed, she watched as Alex, or whatever he had become, knelt beside her. His face was inches from hers, his breath cold against her skin. "She wants you next," he whispered. The room began to spin, the walls melting into a swirling blackness. Ellen tried to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing she saw before the world went dark was the red scarf, now wrapped tightly around her wrist, as though it were pulling her into the void. When she woke, she was no longer in the house. She was standing on Mulholland Drive, her car parked haphazardly on the shoulder. Her keys were in her hand, and her phone buzzed incessantly in her pocket. She answered without looking. "Ellen," a voice hissed. It was Alex again, but this time his tone was panicked. "She's not done with you yet." The call ended abruptly. Ellen stared at her phone, her pulse racing. The screen displayed no missed calls. In the distance, the house loomed, its windows glowing faintly as if lit from within. She swore she saw a figure standing in the master bedroom window, watching her. The shape raised a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. But it wasn't Alex this time. It was her. And then the lights in the house went out. Ellen couldn't breathe as she stared at her reflection waving from the house. It wasn't possible. She was here on the road. Her trembling hands gripped the steering wheel, and she forced herself to drive away. But as the car sped down Mulholland Drive, her phone buzzed again. The screen displayed one word: home. Her car's headlights flickered, and the steering wheel locked. The engine sputtered and died, leaving her stranded in the suffocating darkness. A low hum filled the air, growing louder, vibrating through her bones. She turned to look out the window and froze. The house was there, impossibly perched on the side of the road, its windows glowing faintly, its door slightly ajar. Something inside her broke. She couldn't run anymore. Slowly, as if pulled by invisible strings, she stepped out of the car and walked back toward the house. The front door creaked open wider to welcome her. Inside, The air was thick and cold, the scent of cigars choking her lungs. Shadows shifted, coiling around her like smoke. "Ellen," a voice whispered from every direction. "You're home." The door slammed shut behind her, and the house fell silent. Weeks later, when the next realtor arrived to assess the property, she found the red scarf draped over a chair in the living room. On the wall above it, a new name was scratched into the wood. Ellen Carter. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.